like it's taking a little longer these days for the video to come up on my screen. We're getting it. Okay, Virginia Gal says hi. Pauline Michael says shalom from Arkansas. Welcome, Virginia Gal says watching from Brisbane, Australia. Fantastic. Janice Beanstalk and Pauline Michael are in the house. Leona Sue Thacker. All right, let me get the YouTube stream in front of me. Very good. Okay. Beautiful. Sharon Fran Brooks says, greetings from the beautiful spring night in Lebanon, New Jersey. On the deck, studying in the moonlight. Love it. Jonathan Haynes says, shalom. Lucy Ram Johnson says, shalom from Minnesota. And Leona Sue says, it's hot and humid here in southern Illinois. Tammy Lynn says, hi from central PA. All right. I apologize for being a little late today. I usually try to go at 6 p.m. Pacific on weeknights. Generally speaking, Sunday to Thursday, we go about 6 p.m. Pacific. Friday, I have to go early with Shabbat coming in, and I aim for noon on Fridays, noon Pacific. And then Saturday night, as soon as I can after Shabbat ends, depending on the time of year. But, it's every day, so stuff comes up in life. And today something came up in the afternoon. So here we are. Let's get right to it. We've got a beautiful pair of Mishnahs today. We are in Masechet Shabbos, Tractate Shabbos, the second volume of the Talmud. We are in chapter 10. We're on Daf Tzadi Dalet. That's page 94. We're in chapter 10, and today we're going to look at Mishnahs 6 and 7. So let's get into it. All right, the Mishnah says that if we're carrying out on Shabbos from the private domain into the public domain, and we're taking just a little bit of food, a small amount of food, in fact, so little that it's less than the minimum measure, to be liable for carrying out on Shabbos. In other words, it's a bit of food that is so small as to be insignificant. However, the little piece of food is in a big vessel. So imagine a big, heavy wooden salad bowl and just a tiny bit of food inside of it that doesn't amount to the minimum measure of food to be liable for carrying on Shabbos. So, are we liable for violating Shabbos if we carry this big heavy bowl with only a tiny bit of food inside it outside on Shabbos? Yesterday we learned if we carry a heavy mass out on Shabbos, imagine that this food bowl is a really heavy, substantial food bowl. It weighs a couple of pounds. It's solid. It's big. Nevertheless, the vessel is secondary to its contents. Right? A vessel is made for carrying food. So if it's only carrying such a small amount of food that the food is not significant enough to render us liable for carrying out on Shabbos, then even this heavy bowl will not make us liable for carrying on Shabbos. So the important principle here, and we're going to come back to it, is that the vessel is secondary to its contents. The Mishnah also teaches if we carry out a bed from inside the house, from the private domain out into the public domain, and this bed has a person on it, a living person, we are exempt. Now, this sounds crazy. Okay, I understand. The vessel carries food, and it's only a tiny bit of food. Now you're telling me that if I carry a heavy bed with a person, a human being, even the lightest human being weighs maybe 100 pounds, right? Or a kid, weighs less, but it's a pretty substantial thing we're carrying. And you're telling me I'm going to be exempt for carrying a bed with a living person on it? Yes, and we're going to unpack why. But if we carry a bed with a corpse on it, now we are going to be liable for violating Shabbos. If we carry a bed from the private domain out to the public domain with a corpse on it, we're going to be liable. And by the way, if we carry, this doesn't say in the Mishnah, but if we carry a bed out without a person on it, we're going to be liable for that as well. That's just a large mass, right? And what we learned yesterday is if it takes two people to carry that bed, you can't carry it just one person. So now both people that combine to carry that bed, which neither of them could carry alone, they're both going to be liable for carrying out that bed. And yet, if there's a living person on the bed, they won't be. And we're going to understand why when we get into the Gemara on this Mishnah. Now that we're talking about a corpse on the bed, we also get a few additional rules. If you carry out just a very tiny piece of a corpse, right? So, I don't know, maybe you're a scientist and you know, you were doing experiments and there's just like a little piece of a human corpse. So how little? Well, now the minimum measure for carrying on Shabbos is going to be tied to the minimum measure for transferring tuma, ritual impurity. So a corpse, in order to transfer ritual impurity, the minimum amount of human corpse is an olive bulk. So if you carry an olive bulk of corpse outside, you're going to be liable for violating Shabbos because that's a significant amount. Likewise, an olive bulk of a piece of carcass, right? So not a human body, but an animal carcass, an animal body, a dead body. Or a lentil bulk, right? So the volume of just a lentil of a creeping thing. In Hebrew, a sheretz. Because that's significant. A sheretz, even such a tiny amount as a lentil, the volume of a lentil, can transmit ritual impurity, can transmit tuma, and therefore it's significant. And if you carry it out from the private domain to the public domain, it will make you liable for violating Shabbos, liable to bring the chatas, the sin offering. In these cases of carrying out this minimum measure of a human corpse or an animal carcass or a lentil bulk of a creeping thing, a sheretz, Rabbi Shimon would exempt. The rabbis hold you liable, and the halacha is that you would be liable, but Rabbi Shimon would exempt because Rabbi Shimon holds that you would be removing this thing from the house just because you want it out of the house, not for the intended purpose of taking it out to go use it somewhere or bury it or whatever. Rabbi Shimon is saying the reason you're carrying it isn't really to carry it, it's just you want to get it out of the house. So that's why he would exempt, but the rabbis make you liable. All right, let's get into the Gemara on this. We understand that the vessel, let's say that heavy wood bowl that is only going to be carrying a tiny amount of food inside, and we're going to remain exempt for moving this thing out of the house because the vessel is secondary to its contents, secondary to the food, and because there's so little food inside, less than the minimum measure, we're going to be exempt for carrying this bowl of the tiny bit of food outside of the house. The live person on the bed. Why are we exempt if we carry a bed out of the house with a live person on it? This sounds like a really large amount of stuff, a whole bed with a whole person on it. We learned a couple days ago that you are not allowed to carry a baby on Shabbos. You cannot carry a baby on Shabbos. And yet you can carry out a bed with a living person on it. So what is the difference between the baby and the living person? Why is this bed with the person possible? So first of all, the bed vis-a-vis the living person that's on it is like the vessel and the food. The bed is secondary to the living person or the corpse that's on top of it. So the designation of whether this thing is significant or not is going to be based on the person and not the bed, because the bed is secondary. Why is it that we can carry a bed with a living person on it, but not a bed with a corpse on it and not a baby? Because the baby or the corpse do not assist you in carrying them, right? The baby doesn't help you carry the baby. The baby just lies there. The corpse obviously can't help you. It's dead. But a living person is assumed to desire to help you in carrying the living person. And this is why you cannot carry a baby on Shabbos, but you can carry a child. You can carry a child. How big a child does it have to be? It's a child that can walk. Once the child can walk, then it's assumed that it's going to participate in moving itself. And you can kind of imagine that, because when the child is on you, right, a child that can walk, when you lift it up, I remember when our kids were really small, it was like the mom carry, right, where you put the child on your hip, right, kind of lean the hip out a little bit. And the child, what does it do? The child wraps its legs around you, puts its arms around you, and the child is helping you, right? The child is actually participating in moving itself. And so this is likened to what we learned yesterday, that if two people who are each capable of carrying something out on Shabbos combine to do it, so then they are exempt because neither one is carrying that whole weight of the thing. Neither one is doing the whole transgression. They're joining together to do something that either one of them could have done alone. Likewise, you can walk on Shabbos, the child can walk on Shabbos. Okay, the child got tired and so you picked it up. You didn't violate Shabbos. But a baby can't support itself. A corpse can't support itself. And that's why the bed with a living person that's not a baby can be carried outside, and you will remain exempt from bringing the sin offering. Animals, on the other hand, do not support themselves. They're more like a baby. In fact, they're even worse than a baby because the animal wants to escape. It doesn't want to be picked up. So not only does it not support itself, it makes itself a bigger burden because while you're trying to carry it, the animal is trying to escape. So it doesn't help you at all in that job of carrying the animal. It's more of a burden. Okay, and for this reason, interesting, a horse can bear a rider on Shabbos. Now, the rabbis decreed no horseback riding on Shabbos. We cannot ride a horse. Why? Not because we can't put ourselves on the horse on Shabbos, but rather this is a rabbinic decree, not a Torah violation. Right? If you do ride, the rabbis prohibit you to ride a horse on Shabbos. If you do ride a horse, you don't become liable to bring a sin offering, but you have violated a rabbinic prohibition. Why did the rabbis prohibit us from riding a horse? Because if we ride a horse on Shabbos, while we're out there, we may come to violate a Torah prohibition. For example, in order to goad the horse to get moving, we might, just grab a branch off a tree to make a little switch, a little goad to the horse and just give it a tap on the butt so that it'll get moving. But when we cut or tear a branch off a tree, that's harvesting, right? At that point, we have harvested that branch from the tree and we violated the Shabbos. And so the rabbis are protecting us from doing this. Similar reason why we cannot ride bicycles on Shabbos. It's not a Torah violation, although some say you're carrying yourself by riding the bike. But more people will say that the reason you can't ride a bike is because something may happen to the bike. And then it can't go anymore, and you may need to repair it, or you may need to push it, which is like carrying the bike. Now the bike's not carrying you, you'd be carrying the bike. Even though you're just pushing it, you end up carrying this object through the public domain more than 4 cubits. And to protect you from doing that, the rabbis decreed against, this was obviously much later, there were no bicycles in the ancient world, but eventually a ruling came from prominent rabbis that we don't ride bicycles on Shabbos for this reason, the same reason we don't ride a horse on Shabbos. Now, but the horse can carry a rider. Why is this relevant? We can't ride a horse, but there may be a situation where a non-Jew who doesn't have to observe Shabbos wants to borrow or rent the horse owned by a Jew. Now, if you're a Jew and you own a horse, your horse cannot do labor on Shabbos. It cannot carry cargo. It cannot bear a burden on Shabbos. But it can bear a person for the same reason that the bed could bear a person and we could carry it out, because the person who's riding the horse helps carry his own weight. I mean, it's obviously a bit of a technicality because if he's on the horse is bearing the weight. But nevertheless, a person adjusts himself, a person carries himself, and legally speaking is understood to join with the horse in the effort of moving himself in the public domain. So one can rent or lend his horse to a non-Jew who might then go ahead and ride it on Shabbos. A question came up for the sages having to do with Persian knights. Not knights versus day, but like knights of the round table, knights in shining armor. This is pretty interesting when I read it, that the idea of medieval knights, that we associate with Europe, right, with France and England and, jousting and going to war and going to the Crusades, etc. So they were preceded by many centuries by the knights in shining armor of Persia. So the Persian knights, now these were very upper class kind of nobles who could, just like in the medieval knights, it wasn't the average soldier who had a suit of shining armor, a horse, a squire, the whole thing. Likewise in Persia, these were very upper class, nobility who could walk around with the armor. Their armor was so heavy that the sages wondered, when they're armored, can they walk? Because no one ever saw one of these guys in the armor walking. They only saw them on horseback. So they speculated, well, maybe when their armor is so heavy, they can't walk. Now, if they can't walk, then they can't sit on the horse either, because then they become like a corpse or a baby that can't support themselves. They're not participating in the work of carrying themselves. But then the sages realized that these Persian knights in shining armor certainly could walk. One of them walked a long way when the king was angry with him and chased him out of the castle. And so they realized that the reason they were never seen walking rather than on horseback is not because they were unable to walk because of the weight of the armor, but rather because they were snobby. They were arrogant and snobby Persian knights who would only ride a horse, not because they were unable to walk, but because they thought it was beneath their dignity to walk in their armor rather than ride. That was a pretty interesting little bit of history there. We return to the Mishnah, and we recall that in terms of carrying out bits of a corpse or bits of an animal carcass, that it is prohibited if it's the minimum measure for transmitting ritual impurity, for transmitting tuma. Rabbi Shimon exempts. Once we're learning these rules, we also learn that we cannot bury a body on Shabbos. There's no burial on Shabbos. So when a Jew dies, we try to get them in the ground as quickly as possible, the same day sometimes, certainly within 24 hours if possible. But if somebody dies, let's say on a Friday afternoon, they're not going to have that burial on Friday. Normally they would get buried the next day, but if it's Shabbos, we're going to delay that burial until Sunday. So since we can't bury them, you would think we cannot take the corpse outside. But if a corpse is in a house and we're spending Shabbos there in that same house, it becomes problematic for the enjoyment of Shabbos. So ideally, the people who are living in that house where there's now a dead body, they should try to go spend Shabbos somewhere else. If that's not possible, and it's really a problem to have the body in the same place as them, then for the sake of dignity, what they could do is try to move the body, to a shady place. Certainly, it shouldn't be in the sun in a courtyard where it's going to be bad for the dignity of that corpse. But ideally, what they should do for the halakha is to transfer that corpse from the private domain to a carmelit rather than to the public domain, right? So in other words, you're going to carry it out, but we've learned already that if you carry it to a domain which is called a carmelit, which is neither a private domain nor a public domain, so then you haven't made a transfer of that object, in this case, a corpse. And so if you only transfer to the carmelit, like a wide threshold or an area that's pseudo-public. So then it's better than doing the prohibited transfer of taking the corpse from the private domain all the way out into the public domain on Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon would exempt because he exempts activities which are Torah violations done on Shabbos, but if they're not done for their own sake. So the classic example is if you have to move a heavy bench across a dirt floor, it's going to leave a furrow. So Rabbi Shimon says, so leaving a furrow, that's sort of like farming, right? It's like sowing. I mean, it's like hoeing. Creating a furrow is something that a farmer does before he plants seeds. That's a forbidden labor on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda said you can't move the bench if there's a possibility that's going to make a furrow, because the furrow is forbidden, and then you'd be liable for violating Shabbos. Rabbi Shimon says you can move the bench because you didn't intend to make that furrow. It's an unintended consequence. The exception to the Rabbi Shimon rule is if it's inevitable that you're going to make a furrow, if there's no way to move that bench without making a furrow, even though you don't need the furrow, then you can't do it. But in terms of moving the corpse outside, the halacha is not like Rabbi Shimon. Okay, and what Rabbi Shimon was saying is, like, you're not moving the corpse outside to bury it, you just want it out of the house. So, the carrying that results from that is an unintended consequence. But the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Shimon on this, and so we try to find some other solution. Okay. Now we come to Mishnah number 7. I'm going to read this one to you because it's pretty interesting and it's short. And I learned something here which I'm kind of embarrassed that I didn't know before. So, this is Mishnah number 7 in chapter 10. With regard to one who removes his fingernails with one another on Shabbat, meaning without scissors, right? But you kind of bite your nail and then kind of tear a little bit of the nail off, let's say, or with his teeth. And the same is true with regard to one who removes his hair with his hands, like you pluck a hair off your body, just not with a utensil, not with a tweezer, but just with your fingers. And the same is true with regard to his mustache, and the same is true with regard to his beard, and the same is true with regard to one who applies blue eyeshadow, and the same is true with regard to one who applies blush. Rabbi Eliezer deems them all liable to bring a sin offering for violating Shabbos, as they each performed a labor prohibited by Torah law. And the rabbis prohibited performing all of these actions, but you are not liable to bring the sin offering because these are prohibited by a rabbinic decree, right? It's when you violate a Torah prohibition unwittingly that you become liable to bring the sin offering. These rules are rabbinic decrees that you can't do it. Now, what we learn out from this, and we learn in the Gemara that follows, if you trim your fingernails with a utensil, if you use a scissors or a nail clipper or something like that on Shabbos, you have violated a Torah prohibition and you become liable to bring a sin offering if the temple is standing and one can bring a sin offering. I didn't realize that. So that is a heavy prohibition. If you trim your nails you cannot trim your nails on Shabbos. If you do it without a utensil, if you just do it with your fingers, so you shouldn't do it. You're violating a rabbinic prohibition, but at least you're not liable to bring the sin offering. The exception is, let's say that you've got like a snag, like sometimes a nail just tears a little bit. It wasn't your fault. There was an accident. You just dragged it across a chair or something like that, and a bit of your nail is sticking out. And now it's like really uncomfortable, and you're actually even afraid that you might come to cut yourself or scrape yourself with this little bit of nail that's sticking out. Okay, that you can remove with your fingers. Some say you could even remove that with a utensil, but you shouldn't. It's better if you just remove it with your fingers. But normally speaking, you cannot trim your nails on Shabbos. It's a Torah prohibition. What is the prohibition? It's shearing, of all things. It's like shearing a sheep. And remember that all the prohibitions of Shabbos are based on labors that were necessary to create the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert. Trimming one's nails is considered in the same category as shearing the wool off of a sheep. Likewise, you can't cut your hair with the scissors. You can't take like a little tweezers or a little trimmer. God forbid you have a little, hair sticking out of your nose and you want to get rid of it. You got to do it before Shabbos. Now, some say that the minimum measure for liability for trimming a hair on Shabbos is 2 hairs, right? So that 1 hair would be beneath the minimum measure. But unfortunately, if it's a hair that really bothers you, so then it's a significant hair and you can't trim it even 1 hair. So don't trim hairs on Shabbos. And as we're learning these rules, we also learn that one who wants to remove a white hair, because it's like, he doesn't want to have a gray hair, right? Or a white hair among his other colored hair. So there, even 1 hair is significant. You can't do that on Shabbos. Also, a man cannot remove gray hairs. Presumably, a man can't dye his hair either. Not just on Shabbos, but even during the week. Why? Because this is considered a practice of women. Women, who are very particular about their hair and they don't want to have gray hair and they might remove white hairs or gray hairs. Women do that. Women are perfectly entitled to do that. They can't do it on Shabbos. Men are not supposed to do that. That's considered, a kind of, not something that men do. That's a woman's practice, and the Torah prohibits men to dress and make their appearance like women in any way. It's the prohibition against cross-dressing in the Torah. And that's what we've got for today. I imagine there may be some questions about this, so I'm going to start scanning the comments for your comments and questions. Ed Berg, okay, you're calling me out. You just learned this? So how many times have you cut your nails on Shabbos? Like, not so many times, because I guess, when it came up, I thought to myself, I wonder, maybe this isn't okay to do on Shabbos. But because it was Shabbos, I didn't go look it up. I didn't, Google the question. And then I just allowed myself not to know. So this is exactly like something we studied some weeks ago. Somebody who unwittingly violates a Torah prohibition because he didn't know that it was prohibited. I didn't know it was prohibited, so I did it many times. So I only am liable to bring 1 sin offering for all the times that I violated it. If I was to now do it again, now that I've learned the law, so then I would be liable for the sin offering I'm already liable for, and any time I did it again just because I forgot. So like Rabbi, I think it was Rabbi, I can't remember right now, maybe it was Rabbi Yehoshua, but the rabbi who said, how wise are the sages, who said that you should not read by the Shabbos lamp because you might come to adjust the wick. He was a sage. He said to himself, I really know the law. I'm not going to forget that it's Shabbos. I'm not going to forget that I can't adjust the wick. So I'll just read by the Shabbos lamp. And he came to adjust the wick. And he said, when the temple shall be rebuilt, I will bring, with God's help, a a nice fatted sin offering. And so I, Salvador Lifak, violated Shabbos. I'm ashamed. I didn't know. It was an unwitting violation, but I could have found out. It really is on me. I can only blame myself. I should have researched that law. So when the temple will be rebuilt, I will bring a fatted sin offering to atone for my transgression of trimming my nails on Shabbos. I don't know how many times, but please God, help me bring that sin offering, because there's going to be a temple standing where I can bring it, which would be amazing. And help me to remember to bring it, and to be alive to bring it, and to bring it good so that I can atone for my transgression. And I'm laughing because it's a little funny, but I should adopt a more serious attitude about this. It's a Torah prohibition that I violated, so I owe that sin offering. If the temple, for some reason, is not built in my lifetime because Mashiach, the Messiah, hasn't come, so then in my lifetime I wouldn't be able to atone with a sin offering. However, what is available to us is I can pray. First, I can ask God to forgive me, and I will. And I can ask God to help me to not make that mistake again, and not to make the mistake of where I'm unsure whether I can do something to just, barge ahead and do it anyway. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. I should have, even though I can't Google things on Shabbat, I do have a Shulchan Aruch here. I could have looked it up in my book, and I didn't. So that was my failure that I need to atone for. So I need to atone. I need to pray. And because I've done this transgression, I'm going to set aside some money that I'm going to donate to charity after I get off this show. So that's what I'm doing about it, and thank you for asking, Ed. And Ed says, LOL, we don't think any less of you. No, but that's the process that you got to go through. That's the process one has to go through. Melissa Iteljurin says, can you rescue an animal on Shabbos? That's a really tough question. I mean, you're saying, can you carry it inside because it was outside? Well, first of all, if you live in a community where there's an Eruv, so then you can carry on Shabbos. So that would help quite a bit. If you live in a community where there's no Eruv and you can't carry on Shabbos, you can't carry. But maybe you can somehow lead the animal to safety, or you can stay with it out there. I mean, I think the question, can I rescue an animal, would require further clarification, right? There's going to be more particulars to that case that we need to understand before we could rule whether it would be permitted or not. I thought there was a long comment. Bill Eldridge says that the Parthian Persian cavalry were noted as being the only force that ever consistently saw off, or I guess beat off, the Roman legions, who also had a cavalry class, the Equites, or the Equites, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but they rode in lighter armor. So thank you. So that's a real interesting fact about that Persian cavalry. Let's see. Sharon Frant Books. Shouldn't removed of a corpse be desirable out of honoring Shabbat or honoring our fellow human beings' respect for the dead? Absolutely, we have respect for the dead. So, I mean, the situations of carrying a corpse or not being able to carry a corpse, or what we do about a corpse, we're talking on the one hand just about the hypothetically and what exactly is the law and what would we do. However, even in our discussion here, the rabbis say, great is human dignity, and we will find a way. We will find a way to be able to move that corpse. If it's sitting in the sun, we're going to find a way to move it into the shade. And there's certain things that we might have to do in order to move it so that we could do that. But we're going to find that way, because absolutely, we would never disrespect a corpse in any way. And in fact, so great is human dignity that, you see, what is the name of that organization? It's not Hatzolah. But, the emergency services in Israel, God forbid there's a terrorist attack, right? And there was an explosive and people died. It's unimaginable. But when that kind of thing happens, okay, so, the ambulances are going to come and they're going to take, all the people who are injured, and they're going to take them to the hospital, and the people who are dead are going to be transported too. But part of the emergency services in Israel is that there's going to be a core of people, I don't know if they get paid, I think they're volunteers, who are going to scour the whole site of that terrorist attack and find every little piece of a human body so that it can be buried and be disposed of properly. That's how important human dignity is. People, they will go so far out of their way to make sure every bit of that person is, goes to its final resting place properly. Netta says, if the nail has a snag on Shabbat, I remove it with my hand. It happens automatically. And that's okay. The snag is okay because the snag becomes a problem. And removing it with your hand is okay. A priori, it's okay. Removing a snag with your hand is okay. What's not okay, just rabbinically, is like, let's say, to bite your nails, take some off. Like, you start the process of creating the snag on purpose and then remove the rest with your hand. That would be prohibited by rabbinic decree, but would still not be a Torah violation. Although Rabbi Eliezer thought that would also be a Torah violation, but the rabbis disagreed with him and the halachas with the rabbis. What is definitely a Torah violation is trimming one's nails or one's hair or one's beard or any hair on the body or the fingernails with a utensil, with scissors or tweezers or something like that. And Netta says, King Solomon moved King David's corpse by putting either bread or a baby on top of it. Exactly. That's one of those things that they will go into where they're gonna move the body by putting a loaf of bread on top of it, so that this corpse would technically be a vessel for the bread, and then they could move it. But there's a bunch more technicalities about that. So God forbid you're ever dealing with a corpse on Shabbos. May it never happen. Definitely consult a rabbi if possible before doing anything. Ted, okay. And Sal says, Sal, make clear you are not a poskening rabbi. I think I've made that clear so many times, but I will make it clear again. I am not a rabbi. So I'm interpreting these laws as best as I can. When I tell you what the law is, however, it's not coming from my own expertise. I tell you what the law is because here in our Koren Talmud, it just has this beautiful feature, right? That when there's a question of law, it gives the halacha right there. And that's what I love about the Koren Talmud. The Art Scroll Talmud is amazing. Both of these are monumental achievements in printing. Both versions, the Art Scroll and the Koren. The Art Scroll has more commentaries from more periods in history by more different commentators. And there's just a greater in-depth study according to more perspectives are available in the Art Scroll. But when there's a question of what is the law, right? When this sage says this and those sages say that, and they argue back and forth, and the Talmud often doesn't tell you where the law ended up and what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to behave. It's a nice feature of the Koren Talmud that it has those notes and tells what the halacha is. So when I tell you what the halacha is, I'm taking it from the halacha note here in the Koren Talmud. So you can trust me when I say the halacha is. If I don't say the halacha is, if we're just talking about what one sage says and what another sage says, so then we haven't arrived at a conclusion, and you can't rely on that comment of mine to be the law, right? Generally speaking, when you have a question of the law, don't get an answer in passing that you hear at a lecture. Look it up, Google it, ask a rabbi. If the case is at all complicated, has nuances, then you really have to talk it through with a poskening rabbi, and even more than just look it up. So that's why you want to have a rabbi in your life who you can bring halachic questions to. Okay. So that's what I've got for us today. Thank you so much for learning with us in our class. May our learning tonight add to the peace of the world. Torah scholars do add to the peace of the world, so when we're learning together, we are adding to the peace of the world. I'm sending you all my dearest and warmest blessings. It's nighttime now, so it's over, but earlier today was my Hebrew birthday, and I put out a post earlier on Accidental Talmudist conveying my blessings to our entire community. When it's your Hebrew birthday, a channel opens up, and you can bless others, right? So the birthday in Judaism is not so much about receiving gifts as giving blessings, the Hebrew birthday. And if you're curious what your Hebrew birthday is, you can just Google Hebrew date converter, and you'll get to a website called Hebcal, Hebcal. It offers a lot of different things, but one cool feature that it has is that you can convert your birth date into a Hebrew date and then know what your Hebrew birthday is. And on that day, you can give your loved ones blessings in your life. That's all I've got.